Thank you. We're the Cantina Band. If you have any requests, shout them out. Play that same song. All right, same song. Here we go.
Before I catch a bunch of hate in the comments section, just want to say I'm a huge fan of Anthony Jeselnik. This video is about what he's good at, and that is misdirection. He does only tell one type of joke, essentially, but he tells it better than anyone else, and it's not actually simple. It's complicated, and he's very good at it. I think Anthony Jeselnik is a great comic to analyze. A lot of what he's doing seems very obvious and like, oh, all he's doing is misdirection. But there's quite a lot of complexity to it. So that's what I'm going to dive into in this video, how misdirects work, why Anthony Jeselnik structures them in the way he does, and what the difference is between a good and a bad misdirect, because there is a huge difference. And I think most people probably don't even know what like a really bad misdirect looks like, because they've probably only seen good comedy on like famous people's specials and all that. But I think if you want to know by comparison what a bad one looks like, I'm going to use one of my own jokes as an example, and hopefully you'll enjoy it. So let's dive into Jeselnik. One quick little side note about this video: if my shirt suddenly changes into a different shirt at some random point in this video, don't worry about it. I may or may not have spilled spaghetti all over myself and re-recorded the intro. That's just enjoy the video. Have a good one. The first thing I want to do is play one of my favorite Jeselnik jokes. This comes off one of his earlier specials, Thoughts and Prayers.
My brother's crazy. Even my neighbors hate him. The other day I opened up the door, I caught him masturbating. He looks me right in the eyes and goes, "Shut the door." I said, "Get inside."
Misdirect jokes at a fundamental level are just jokes where you imply one thing and then you reveal something else. I call this a widen out because it's sort of like in movies when the camera widens out and you reveal that there's like a monster standing behind the main character or something like that. That's what this joke feels like to me. And I think it's so particularly clever because of how much he foreshadows the ending. I like to compare comedy sometimes to connect the dots. Let's say you have a bunch of dots and it starts to look like, oh, it's a smiley face. The dots are like information you have in the setup of the joke. And they seem to imply one thing, but then all of a sudden you go, oh, actually these dots could also be a banana. Big reveal, very funny. The more you can imply one thing and then reveal the other, generally the more clever it feels. There is this weird balancing act you have to pull off, though. I call it hard misdirects versus soft misdirects. If a misdirect is too soft, it doesn't feel clever. It's like, okay, if you're vague enough, anything can sound like two things, right? But if you get too specific, it starts to feel like you're just lying to the audience. And I've had this experience with some previous jokes of mine, and I'll give an example. Like, I don't do this joke anymore. It's a joke where I'm talking about religion. I was talking about how I'm scared to make jokes about Islamic culture because there are people out there who do not represent the religion of Islam, but nonetheless, they will, come after you. I'm obviously talking about white women on Twitter. Haha, great joke. Usually got a laugh, but then for the rest of the show, no one trusted me. I visibly felt the audience enjoy the rest of my set less because that misdirect is too much of a lie, and everything for the rest of my set, they were kind of like, is he lying again? That's the vibe. Right? And so the harder you misdirect, the more you lose audience trust and the more you're going to hurt the rest of your set, even if that one joke does well. And Anthony Jeselnik does really hard misdirects, which means the audience never trusts him. They always assume he's lying, which is part of what makes it impressive if he can still trick you.
I'm against cancel culture. Thank you. That's my impression of a shit comic trying to get on Rogan.
In my last video, I talked about Louis C.K. How Louis achieves surprise in a lot of ways is by distracting you from the joke structure, making you not think about the fact that you are listening to a joke so that he can surprise you by making you forget. Anthony Jeselnik does literally the opposite. He constantly reminds you are listening to stand-up comedy. I would say in his last special, about half of the jokes in the special were jokes about jokes. They were jokes about the industry. They mentioned his manager. He talked about interacting with previous audience members who had said things about his jokes, I don't want to sit there and count the minutes, but if it was 3/4 of the special was like comedy about comedy, I wouldn't be totally surprised. That sounds about right to me, which is fascinating because it's the opposite of what I think, generally speaking, works for people. Like I think it's actively harder to surprise people the more you remind them they are listening to comedy. I think every comedy show has a bit of a cat and mouse dynamic. It's like when you watch a mystery movie, right? Like Knives Out or whatever. When you watch a mystery movie, at some level, your brain is trying to guess what the twist is going to be, even if you're not like actively trying, right? And I think when you're in a comedy show, at some level, you are trying to guess what the punchline is going to be. And your brain will either very, very actively try to guess the punchline, or just subconsciously you will kind of see it coming. So usually it's bad to remind people they are at a comedy show. But Jeselnik takes a wild approach where he constantly reminds you that you are at a comedy show. And I think there are two reasons why he does that. One, it's more impressive when he still surprises you. If he calls attention to the fact that he's telling a joke and then he can still surprise you with the punchline, it's essentially like Babe Ruth calling his shot. He's telling you what he's going to do before he does it, and then he pulls it off.
So what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna tell you that joke, explain what happened with that woman, and then nail home the point that I'm the best.
The other effect it has is he can constantly feign as if he's breaking character. So the unique thing about the way Jeselnik does misdirects is he's doing them as a character, right? He's pretending to be just the worst human ever. That's like his character he portrays on stage. And all of his jokes end with him revealing he's worse than you realized. So he sells you on the authenticity of a joke. And the authenticity of the setup can be different levels of horrible human. And then the punchline will be even worse than you thought it was.
As a comedian, I've got a responsibility. A responsibility that I take very seriously. The responsibility to get up in front of a group of strangers and give you my opinion on the trans community.
And I think for his first couple specials, it worked at face value. It worked on its own. But the more his audience becomes aware of the mechanics of his set, the harder it becomes for him to trick them. And so now, later on in his career, I think the only way he can truly trick his audience into not seeing the punchline coming is if he makes it seem like he's breaking character and saying something real. Which is why I think this last special he released is so full of these meta jokes and discussions of jokes and stuff like that. Because it sort of makes the audience feel like, oh, is he saying something real right now? Is this an actual, not the character, but the real guy talking? And when they have that thought for even half a second, he's able to use it to surprise them when he reveals, no, I'm still the terrible character, right? I do think that I would enjoy Jeselnik's jokes a little more if he got a little bit more real. And I think he gets a little bit real in this most recent special he released. When he puts Rogan on blast and when he talks about cancel culture, it feels like the real guy is there. And as evidence of that, here's a clip of him talking in an interview about cancel culture.
Talking about cancel culture has become so hack.
Yeah.
And people who have no fear of cancel culture are complaining about it.
Yeah.
That I think it sickens me.
So I think clearly we're getting a glimpse of the real perspective that the real man behind the character has. And I would honestly like more of that from him. Everything in comedy exists somewhere on a spectrum, right? Like there's very real and very fake. And each side of that spectrum has different benefits. So the more real you are, the easier it is to surprise people. I actually think you need less structurally impressive and complicated jokes to impress people when you're very, very real. And I maybe a good example of that is Hannah Gadsby, right? She had that special, Nanette, that was, to me, it felt almost just like it was a story. Like it almost wasn't stand-up comedy to me, and I don't mean that in a negative way. I just mean structurally, it didn't feel quite like stand-up comedy. And I think the result of that is her jokes were very funny even when they were really simple, because you were totally invested in the narrative, right? On the opposite end, you can have something that is blatantly comedy. You can have what Jeselnik is doing. And in that case, you need your jokes to be really, really perfect and really well structured and complicated in order to surprise. And I don't think there's a better end of the spectrum. I think each comic just needs to figure out where they are on the spectrum and potentially move up and down it to keep people surprised, and just realize that there is this power balance in between the structural complexity of a joke and the realness or narrative complexity of a joke. I think sometimes it's very hard for comics to be more narratively real because it's like, as a real human being, it's kind of scary to be vulnerable and real in that way. On the other hand, some comics find it very easy to be real and aren't great at writing good joke structure. As always, the key to good comedy is surprise. So I think the fact that Jeselnik does not vary his structure almost at all is a testament to how truly perfect his joke writing is. Like, I think there's an argument to be made he's the best joke writer like ever, period, but within a very specific and narrow category. That is probably the end of the video. If you liked it, like it, hit that like. It helps, I think. I don't know. Dude, they have that new feature on YouTube where it like glows when I say hit the like button in the video, and I don't control that. That's like an automatic thing, which is pretty cool. If people have recommendations for future videos, I'm very open to it. I think the last video someone mentioned Norm Macdonald. I'm a huge fan of his. I would definitely do some of his content. Norm might be one of the biggest challenges to analyze, honestly, just because he's so good at what he does. But any other suggestions, thoughts, whatever, throw them in the comments. I try to read all the comments and respond occasionally. And have a good one.